Good afternoon, folks, and thank you for joining us today for Intro to Human Resources. We're excited to host this session as a part of our Integral Intro series, where we cover foundational areas of nonprofit management. My name is Sandeep, and I am the Manager of Education at Integral.org, and I will be hosting today's session. So you can reach me in the chat at any time. I'm here to support you in your participation today. We will be using the poll and chat features of Zoom today, so please don't hesitate to drop a comment, question as we move along. Feel free to share any topic-specific questions as well, and we will be sure to come back to them in the Q&A period at the end. We'll start today's session with a land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that Integral.org is based out of Mohkinstsis, which is the Blackfoot name for elbow. This refers to the confluence of Elbow and Bow rivers that run through Treaty 7 territory. Mohkinstsis is the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which is the Siksika, Piikani, Kainai, as well as the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, consisting of the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Métis Nation of Alberta District 5 and 6. We have a long way to go in addressing the tension between the legal and governance structures that we work within in the nonprofit sector and efforts towards truth and reconciliation. We at Integral.org accept our responsibility to work towards reconciling this tension, and we commit to remaining in a position of humility as we consider our history and current reality, knowing that the answers are not clear and easy ones, yet they require all of us to engage. We all have a connection and responsibility to the lands that host our lives, our communities, and our work. With that, I would like to introduce our facilitator for today, Tracy Normand. Tracy is a CPA who has been working in the charitable and nonprofit space for many years. She holds an applied degree in accounting and IT and is experienced in financial management, financial statement audit, financial statement preparation, and presentations to boards and other stakeholders. She has been responsible for writing and maintaining organizational policies specifically related to finance and human resources. She has actively participated in strategic planning activities and has delivered workshops to nonprofit boards on governance and other best practices. Currently, Tracy delivers contracted accounting and consulting services related to finance, policy development, and charitable operations. Welcome, Tracy. I will pass it on to you to get us started for today.
Great. Thank you. Pardon me. Thank you very much, Sandeep. I think I would like to, I'll add a little bit of extra commentary around the bio, just because you might be wondering, well, what makes me qualified to do an introduction to human resources session. And so very briefly, what I would like to touch on is just to comment that I have become a general member of the Charter Professionals in Human Resources, and am currently completing their foundation courses, and I'm working towards the designation. But as Sandeep had alluded to, I've had a ton of experience in this area simply because that's the way things roll when you don't have a dedicated human resources person. So oftentimes in smaller organizations, and certainly for this definitely is applicable to not-for-profits, there is not always the resources available. And so over the course of my career, I think that a lot of it coming out of the fact that I've been responsible for payroll, and there's that significant overlap with human resources. They are certainly two separate functions, as I've come to understand and appreciate more over the last number of years. But they do complement one another, and there is definitely some overlap, as we'll see as we work through the slides here. So just to provide a bit of an overview, we're going to look to define human resources in a succinct way. We're going to speak about the employee life cycle. We'll get into that a fair bit. And then we'll touch on the regulatory environment. There are two to be considered, and that is external to the organization. And then, of course, there are some internal regulations as well that are impactful. We'll talk a bit about some practical applications and resources, and we'll do our best to leave a little bit of time for Q&A. And as Sandeep has said, please drop your questions into the chat as they occur to you. So Sir Richard Branson said something one time that resonates with lots of us. Train people well enough so that they can leave and treat them well enough so that they don't want to. So that encapsulates really a lot of the HR effort, right? Is we want to make sure that we've got great people that are competent and that do the job well, because that helps us to achieve our organizational goals. And we don't want to lose them. Once we've got those great people in place and they're doing a good job, we just don't want to lose them. So we need to make sure that we're treating them appropriately so they want to stay with us, or ideally, that's where we're headed for. Okay, so we'll start off with a poll. So our question for you today is, what is the most challenging HR issue for your organization today? I'll give you a minute to consider that. Okay,
Just a few more seconds here and we'll share the results.
thank you, Sandeep. Okay. And so where we've landed is with 67% of folks indicating that their biggest challenge is that there's no dedicated human resources function. Not surprising at all. The balance of people are talking or have identified high turnover as an issue. I suggest to you that the turnover might have something to do with the fact that there's no dedicated HR function, potentially at least anyways, without knowing anything else about that. So thank you for participating in that poll. I appreciate that. We'll see what sorts of resources we can link you guys up with so that we can help to alleviate a bit of that. So what is human resources then? So human resources really is the set of people who make up the workforce. HR is also a profession and an area of study. So human resources, the key point to take away out of this is that it's people. Great, thank you. Human resources also should be considered as a subset of strategic planning, maybe alongside as opposed to a subset. The point here around aligning, like HR plans, human resources plans should be aligned with the organization's strategic plan. And the strategic plan is coming out of the organizational vision, mission, and values. And so in order for us to align our HR plan with those things, we have to understand what factors play into that. So our vision, just as a basic reminder, our vision is generally speaking a inspirational statement of where the organization wants to be at some future point. The values are the core beliefs that are in practice as we go about our day-to-day business, and the mission is aided by the HR plans. And so the humans that are in place to do the work that needs to be done. And so looking externally, we'd be looking at factors like the current economy, the employee marketplace for your specific skill set. It's a bit of a struggle because human resources is such a broad area that when we're speaking to a group of organizations, we have to speak in very broad terms. So again, external factors might be the competitive nature of your particular area. Maybe you actually, let's just move on here. Sorry. Pardon me for a minute. So moving into the typical employee life cycle, I would say that I'll point out that it's a circle and it's circular, and that is definitely the case. You could jump in at any particular point here in the life cycle to speak about any of these phases. We'll start at what seems to be the logical place to start, which is attracting. So when you're looking to attract employees to your organization, there's one of the trendy terms that we've heard a lot about is becoming an employer of choice. It's actually a very valid goal to have. So, and how do we do that? I suppose the way that we do that is we're visible. We're visible to people out in the sector that we work in, the industry that we work in, and we work to cultivate the organization's reputation. We are strong in our cultural beliefs. We communicate well with others, and we have strong human resources policies. And those policies indicate that we provide fair compensation, compensation to our employees, that we are clear in what our expectations are, and we know how to tell the story. So all of these things sort of contribute to the culture of the organization and the reputation out in the community. So being visible and cultivating that reputation is going to make us attractive. At least that's the thinking, is that it will make us attractive to potential employees. And so, and so moving into the next phase, once we feel confident that that's where we're at and we feel good about that, then we've identified some kind of a need for a new employee or a replacement employee. And so we're going to move into the recruitment phase. And so to recruit for folks to our organization, we're going to tackle that in a couple of different ways potentially. So much of this is dependent on who you are, your specifics for your organization. Who is it that you're looking for? It's important to understand who that target person is, because you're only going to reach them if you've placed your ads in the right places, or if you've put your effort into the correct areas. And so what I mean by that, I guess, is that when we talk a little bit about traditional advertising, we do prepare a job description and a job ad, and we get that posted somewhere. Well, who's going to see it really, and who do we want to see it is a bigger question. So because we deal with not-for-profits and small charities, and that's who we're talking to today, I would suggest that two of the better advertising places would be Reach Higher or work in nonprofits. And the reason I would say that is because those are specifically targeted towards individuals looking for jobs in those sectors. Now, if you move over to Indeed or Glassdoor, then you're perhaps communicating or advertising to a larger, more global market, which may or may not be appropriate depending on who it is you're looking to hire. The other thing to take into consideration is the type of work, of course, right? So thinking about Service Canada and the Job Bank through the Human Resources Development Canada option, you can advertise there for sure. That's a great place, great resource, but it's across the country, and it includes just such a wide variety. So it may or may not be the best place for you to advertise, depending on the role that you're looking to fill. Some of the other targeted recruitment efforts that you could consider / should consider might be things like placement firms or temporary agencies, where you can bring somebody in on a temporary basis and then potentially hire them on full time. That takes some of the vetting off of your plate. It's leaning into some of the other options that are available out there. There are also job fairs that might be hosted by governments or industries. And of course, not to overlook educational institutions and graduate recruitment, which is a great area, assuming that's the appropriate type of employee that you're looking for, someone entry level, I suppose. The other area there in terms of going through educational institutions are the potential for work integrated learning opportunities. So co-ops and that kind of thing, oftentimes that can be a really great resource for entry-level employees. Next, a couple of other areas that go along with recruiting are screening and interviewing. And the screening bit can be quite important. It can be a very difficult thing when you put out an advertisement and find that you've got, 500 resumes that have come in that you've somehow got to sift through. And so again, hopefully, when you determined where you were going to do your advertising, you targeted a little bit so you don't actually end up in that position. But even if it's 250 and not 500, there still has to be a way to get that number down to something that's a bit more manageable. So this is where your screening efforts come into play. And so one of the things that I would speak to is a cover letter. And I think that a lot of the time a cover letter can be used for flow, to understand if the person has skills in communication, if they're able to spell and, or use spell check, I guess. It's often quite surprising to me when you see a cover letter that has numerous spelling errors, considering what tools are out there that are available to most anyone. So it gives you some clue in terms of people, their attention to detail, or how cautious they are in terms of representing themselves. And that can be important information, because at some point as an employee, they'll be representing you. So another area for screening is around the must-haves. And so drawing some very hard lines can be it can be critical, and it can save you a whole bunch of time as well. And so a good example of that might be a certification for like whatever the role is. Maybe it doesn't matter. Whatever the role is, if there's a certification that's required, then you clearly state that expectation, draw your hard line, and anyone who doesn't have that goes in the not today pile. So another area is another potential way to screen some of that out is to test. If it's skill-based work, there is an opportunity to provide some small basic testing. Like, for example, as an accountant, I might test somebody on setting up a basic budget or something like that, giving them some simple parameters and giving them an opportunity to provide some kind of work that shows me that they understand the concept and that they're able to actually do the work. So testing where it's skill-based can be a good method of screening. And then I'd also say the Google social media search thing is definitely something that most employers do. And we should understand that and realize that on both sides of the table that people control their own privacy. It's like a number of years ago, I remember having a conversation about this and just being told that, that might be kind of an invasion of privacy, and disagreed strongly, because in terms of social media, people set their own privacy, and it also gives you a little more insight into the person, or it potentially can, depending on how they come up in those searches. So definitely something to consider. Moving into interviewing, obviously, we all interview always. I would say that we should always check references for sure. Ideally, an interview would be done by two people if it's at all possible. And the benefit there is just an extra set of eyes, an extra set of ears to, to take notes and to observe things and to, offer insightful questions potentially coming out of some answer. So two minds are better than one, I guess, is the idea there. In terms of choosing the modality that best suits the role, I think my only comment, or the only reason I would include that here, is just because of the surgence of online. So the video meetings that become very, very common. And so you could interview someone initially over the phone or in a video scenario. In person, I would suggest, is always best. And I would suggest that for a whole bunch of reasons, not the least of which is the potential for a candidate to interact potentially with other employees of the organization, or maybe clients that might be passing through, that kind of thing. It can provide some interesting insights if that person actually attends your office for an interview. So once we've gone through all of this and we've made our written offer, and we've got somebody we've got the ideal candidate, and they've signed off on the written offer they've been provided with, and they are joining. And so we're now at onboarding. That's the phase in the employee life cycle that we're in now. So we're going to onboard these people and get them acclimated to our organization. So there's a whole bunch of things that have to happen in order for this to go smoothly. And which is why I would suggest a checklist is useful, definitely, so that nothing gets missed. One of the first things you want to do is announce the new hire. So when that person joins, everybody else in the organization is aware that this person has been hired and is starting today, and here's their role and welcome. And they feel good about that when they open up their email, and that's the first one they see. And so hopefully some of your team reaches out to them as well. And that's also a bit of a feel-good piece. I would suggest that you need to make sure that all fobs, keys, logins, everything is set up. The workstation is ready to go, and tested is one thing as well. You don't want to have to scramble on day one because something's not working because you hadn't tested it. Giving swag, if it's available, is great. That is a really nice touch. I think everybody always appreciates that. It's such small things sometimes can make such a big difference in terms of how people feel on day one. And so if you have some branded stuff around that you can part with a little, then that will go a long way to making that person feel welcome. Restating expectations. So going over, obviously on day one, we go over job descriptions, and we have the employee go through the policies. We have them sign off a bunch of paperwork. When we go over the job description with them, and we actually go over a training and development plan as well, that will cover off the orientation period, what we're really doing here is we're restating our expectations. And while we want everybody to feel great and it's all going to be nice and warm and fuzzy on that first day, we still have to keep in mind that there is a job to do. They've been hired to do a particular job. And so we'll bring it back around by restating expectations on that first day. I would say that it also makes sense to give a tour and to make introductions to anybody and everybody that's around in person. And if possible, assign a buddy. This can always be a very good thing. Sometimes things will come up for a new employee that they're more comfortable talking to a colleague about as opposed to a supervisor. And so if they've got somebody that they can lean into, then that can be very useful. And lunch, I would suggest that lunch on day one is nice too. It's another nice little thing that happens, but it's a small bit that can go a long way to making that first day a pleasant one for your new employee. So I'd suggest it should be the supervisor and the buddy and the new employee at minimum, and the whole team if possible. So yeah, so that's day one. So after day one, we've got this great employee that we've onboarded really well, and they're pleased and happy to be around. And so now what do? Well, now we carry on with the good work that's being done by all of these organizations out here. And part of that is going to be developing our staff to make sure that we have a competent workforce. You'll note that a few times throughout this presentation, I've made a note of succession planning. And when I've sort of slipped that in a few different places, I'm not talking about a formal written plan. What I'm talking about is just always having it sort of in your mind that everybody exits an organization at one point or another. And so at some point, there's going to be room for promotions. There's going to be room for people to be developed. And so as you're thinking about the future and planning into the future a little bit, you're always thinking about how this person might develop. Is this the right one that's going to move into this role or that role? So it's something to just keep in the back of your mind always, along with, of course, organizational goal achievement. That's always certainly the goal of the organization. So development of staff can also it's important to note that it can be a piece of the compensation package, that it can be viewed in that way, maybe more so than you even intended, potentially. It's definitely part of that compensation package, and specifically around professional development, which oftentimes those opportunities are external to the organization. They can provide some real excitement and renewed energy for employees to get out into the world and out with other folks in the industry and learning new skills and knowledge and bringing that stuff back to the organization. It can be a real boost for them and for the organization as a whole. And when people are happy, they talk about it for sure. So that aids in the branding piece and improving or accentuating our culture, where we support people and we like to see them develop. This is our goal. The other comment I'll make around this area in terms of development is just briefly, I want to speak to cross-training. Cross-training can be a very important tool for you, given that our audience today, I think, is a lot of small not-for-profits, organizations that might not have a ton of resources or capacity for various roles. And so the cross-training piece becomes important because we can learn each other's roles and help to cover off leaves, and people stay interested that way as well. It builds the capacity of the organization. It can be super helpful, assuming you have the ability to do that. Another part of development is around performance management. And so the suggestion here quite strongly is that there should be regular check-ins. And this will look different for different organizations and different people, depending on who you are. I personally, in my own business, I have 2 employees, so we're a pretty small organization for sure, but I check in with each of them weekly. And some weeks it is a full hour check-in, and most weeks it's a lot less than that. Some weeks we skip it entirely. So it depends on what's going on, but there's that opportunity is always on the calendar every week. We always come together, even if it's just for a very short period of time, to say, there's nothing, we don't need to go over anything this week. We're all good. So those are important, and those are important because your staff then know that you're interested in what's going on. They know that you are available to answer questions if something has come up that they're not sure how to handle. It can be indicative of the support that you're offering for sure. And doing it regularly is important too, because stuff comes up along the ways. So the periodic performance evaluation is still important. It still has to be done. You need to document that and hold that information in the employee's personnel file, and that makes up part of the file. It's an important piece. They need to have feedback. Employees always need to have feedback. We need to know how we're doing. If we're doing a good job, for the most part, if we're not doing a good job, we want to know that too. We want to know how to fix that. And so the way that that's communicated to us should be done certainly in a respectful way, but it should be on an ongoing basis. The strong recommendation here is that you don't drop a bunch of issues on somebody at an annual performance evaluation. That along the way you've had discussions and you know what's going well and you know what's not. And so when you get to that performance evaluation stage, you're going to make your determination around what that looks like based on the interactions that have occurred over the period, whether it's a year or half year, or however you do that. The other side to all of this is to celebrate successes. And so oftentimes when we think about performance management, our minds tend to go to the negative and to where there are problems. And certainly that is part of human resources. There's no question. People are people. And that kind of thing will come up. But so do good things. And so the good things need to be acknowledged. And so celebrating successes can be very important. It indicates to the employee and to the team itself. If somebody, let's say they've achieved some sort of a milestone, they've earned a certificate or something like that, doing some kind of an acknowledgement for them in front of the whole team is going to make them feel good. It's also going to signal to the entire organization that employees are valued and that somebody is noticing when they're doing good things as well. So so it's a feel-good piece. So when staff are maybe not meeting expectations, what do we need to do then? Well, we need to stop and provide some extra coaching, probably. Certainly we need to offer that. We need to have discussions with them about it. We need to give them some opportunities to make improvements. Oftentimes we can offer some, maybe it's not just direct coaching, maybe it's some skills enhancement externally. If we know what's going on with employees, then we can oftentimes find a way to address the issue, to meet the need without going down a negative road. But sometimes none of that stuff works. And so again, I'm going to go back to and comment again on the check-ins because that's important. Like establishing that rapport with your employees on a regular basis gives them the permission to have conversations with you about stuff that might be going on that may not be skill specific. Maybe there's no skill deficiency. Maybe they need some flexibility in their schedule for some personal reason, and it's impacting the way that they're doing their work and completing things. And so having those conversations with them along the way can be helpful to avoid going down a performance improvement plan road. So, but sometimes that is necessary. And so when that is necessary, then you go down that road. And so you put these plans in writing. You indicate definitely some achievable milestones. You set some timelines for the improvement to happen within which, and you have some kind of a consequence that's clearly stated in terms of not meeting the improvement plan. The last piece that's definitely important is the employee sign off. So you want them to buy into this, and you want them to understand that you're cooperating with them, you're collaborating, you're doing your best to get them back on the right path, so that yeah, so that they can stay with you and live out that cycle in a positive way. And so that's all good. Last comment on this particular item is monitoring. Like you have to monitor it and you have to follow up. There's no point in putting a plan in place if you're not going to see it through. And that will signal something entirely different to your organization if you don't see it through. So important lessons here. And the comment around that is just that we get so busy, and we all understand that that happens, but there has to be a carve out of time for these issues if you're going to manage them appropriately. And so we're trying to retain our people, of course, once we've gone through all of this and we've hired them and done all this work to get to this place. We don't want to lose them tomorrow. And we know that there's pretty heavy competition out there from time to time, I guess. And again, depending on the sector that you're in, depending on the skill set that you're looking for, there's so many factors that play into this. But we want to retain people, and we know that people work for money, right? So compensation is one area, definitely. So making sure that we're paying people a living wage, a fair salary for the work that they're doing, for the position that they hold, is very important. Having some kind of a benefits plan and some paid time off is super helpful as well. It's all part of the compensation package. These are all different components, and depending on all sorts of different factors, you might offer all of them or most of them, or select pieces. But the idea being that this is part of what convinces people to stay with you, is that they feel like they're being treated fairly in this way. And so the extension to that is the culture. And so talking about staff events and recognition, this back to that celebrating successes and providing development opportunities, all of these things contribute to the culture. And if the culture is a positive one, then people talk about that and they want to be there and they want to participate in the events and that kind of thing. Because they're loyal to your organization because you've done all the right things. Lastly, my last comment would be maybe around flexibility in terms of culture. And that has, it's become more and more critical in the last few years, and that's not likely to go away anytime soon. People appreciate some flexibility, whether it's in a remote work arrangement or in other ways. There's lots of different areas in which flexibility can be offered. So in order to retain people, we really, I guess what it boils down to is we got to give them what they want. And how do we know what they want? Well, hopefully we ask them. That's probably the best way to understand what people are looking for. What do your employees value? And so you can ask them in various ways. I'm going to bring up that check-in thing again. You're having those conversations on a regular basis. Maybe you put in a suggestion box if you feel like people are not forthcoming for some reason. And maybe you do surveys, and surveys can be structured to collect all sorts of different information and can be a really useful tool as a manager. So transition. So this is the tougher one for sure. And transition is a nice word to say exit, I guess, in this employee life cycle. And so everyone will get here. That's kind of the key point about this, is that no matter who you are and whatever job it is, most of us have a few of them over our lifetime, but we're going to exit each of them in one way or another. And so sometimes the exit is the employee choosing to exit, and sometimes it's for good reasons and sometimes not so much. And the opposite is true as well. The employer choice, sometimes it's a good thing that they're moving, maybe they're moving into getting transferred to another area, another branch of yours or something like that, because they've done a great job or you're promoting them. So oftentimes there can be lots of good reasons that people leave, and sometimes not. Thank you. I'd say I like without getting into too much of that, it's such a large area that has a lot of significant pieces to it. So speaking to with cause and without cause, those kinds of things are a bit more than this webinar will offer. There's some lots of good information out there that can help you in those areas. So carrying on with our exit or our transition, I would say that it's a good idea to announce as early as possible. Obviously, we always have privacy concerns. We'll touch on that a little bit in the regulatory stuff, but announcing as early as possible so that people have room to say goodbye, and that's the next item, of course, giving space and time for goodbyes, and so being respectful of the fact that these people have devoted, whatever period of time to your organization, and they've formed relationships in the organization, and so giving them that opportunity to exit in a good way is a good thing for sure. I would say we should always offer an exit interview. Always, I generally don't speak in black and white. Usually I don't use always or never, but ideally, if you're in a position to offer this and you've got something available that makes sense, you can get some really good information from exit interviews, but only if you listen actively. And so that's the other part of the exit interview, is that oftentimes it makes more sense to have it done by somebody who's not the employee supervisor, the exiting employee supervisor, by somebody else who might be a bit more neutral. But offering the exit interview, listening during the exit interview, and then doing something with the information. That'll come up a little bit later as well, but that's kind of key also, is that you can collect all the information in the world, but if you're not doing something to make a change, then I'd suggest the process is a bit flawed. And lastly, I would say be mindful that all of your former employees impact your reputation. And people tend to share when they have bad experiences, probably more so than when they have good ones. So it's important to do your best to make sure that people are exiting in a positive way and feeling good about it. Okay, the regulatory environment. This is a big one. Again, it's a very broad area. There's all kinds of particular items that we're going to touch on that we're not going to be able to get into in any depth at all. And so, as there should be, there are lots of regulations that are associated with people and how they're treated, and how we interact with them. And so one of the first pieces to be clear about is to understand what rules apply to you always. It's always an important thing. So in this particular case, what we're highlighting here is that there are federal labor standards that are applicable to federally regulated industries. Those industries, though, include air transportation, banking system, the public service, so people who work for the federal government, and construction. There are a few others, but when you get the slides, you'll be able to check this link and have a look at that to satisfy your own curiosity. I would imagine most of the people attending that would be interested in this webinar are going to fall under Alberta employment or provincial employment standards. Again, because we're in Alberta, that's what we're speaking to. And so Employment Standards Alberta covers off the rights and obligations of employers and employees. And I want to emphasize a little bit the employees piece of it, because there are some obligations in addition to rights that people should become aware of as they apply to your particular organization. So the next item in this external regulatory environment is around occupational health and safety. So there is there is a piece of legislation that's all about safeguarding workers' well-being. It has come out of a need over many, many, many years, and the legislation itself has changed a little bit over the last number of years. There was a significant update that happened in around 2018, I believe. And we'll get to some resources. There's a lot of really good resources out there to help guide you in this area. It's a pretty important area. And the changes that I very briefly alluded to were pretty significant and they cover a wide range. I think that when I first reviewed those, I was quite surprised at how extensive they were and how much that they covered that really I wasn't aware of prior to 2018 when, these yeah, what I'm referring to specifically is a piece on psychological safety. So just because I'm stumbling a little bit, that's kind of what's going through my mind. But yeah, there are some pieces that you might not necessarily expect in there. So it's good to have an overview and to it's critical that you gain an understanding in terms of what your obligations are as an employee, even in areas that you might not necessarily have expected that you would have any responsibility for. Next is the Alberta Workers' Compensation Board. And so what they do is administer the act, the piece of legislation that defines that, and they provide insurance for work-related injuries or illness. The insurance typically is disability or life insurance around this. And if it's mandatory, it's mandatory. And if it's not, it's not. So a lot of, maybe not a lot, but there certainly are some industries that are optional. So you can choose to opt into WCB or not. That's probably applicable to a number of people who would be attending this webinar, that it likely is optional. And for some of you, it won't be optional at all. So you need to know where you sit in that, definitely, and make sure that you're complying with the rules that are applicable to you. The next item is the Alberta Human Rights Commission. And so this provides protections under another piece of legislation called the Alberta Human Rights Act. And in particular for this, there are a number of protected grounds that are applicable to employment-related pieces. So the act itself, the Human Rights Act, is not specific. It is specific. It's not only covering employment situations. It also covers tenancy and some other areas as well. And so some of the grounds that are protected under the Human Rights Act would include, I'm not sure if I'm going to know them all off the top of my head, but certainly they would include age, they would include sexual orientation, they would include gender expression and gender identity, physical and mental disabilities, age, source of income, family status. I believe I'm missing at least one, but that's okay. It's certainly something that you can and should look up to be sure that you're in compliance with that piece of legislation as well. And here is the privacy bit that we have talked about a little bit. And so there are privacy legislation. Sorry, pardon me. There are laws at both the provincial level and at the federal level that cover off privacy. And so in terms of employment, I think that where we need to land on this is just to be sure that we understand what our obligations are for sure, but we also are very aware that we are only allowed to use the personal information that we collect for very specific purposes, and we need to share those purposes with the people from whom we're collecting that information. So because we're talking about staffing, we'll limit ourselves to that. But the idea is that the personal information you're collecting, you're going to use that to administer the employment contract, and that is your purpose. And if there is any reason to use that information for any other purpose, you best be talking to your employees about that. That is the most appropriate way to behave in that. And I guess I would also add that there are also ombudsmen and different resources that you can access that can help to guide you around this as well. There's so much information out there. I'm excited for you once we hit the resource page to sort of explore a little bit of that, because webinars, seminars, all sorts of information is available out there to assist folks with complying with all of these various pieces. So lastly, sorry, I'll get you to back up just for 1 second. I'm just going to talk about employment case law just very, very broadly. And I'm not going to get into any cases or anything like that. I'm not a lawyer. obviously. And so the reason that I would include this in here is because it does form part of the regulatory environment, because case law, as cases make their way through the course, precedents are set and common law is established. And so these things uh, help to guide the actions that we take or should take, as we're informed by our legal counsel around these kinds of things. Sorry, that was very stumbly. And so I think really essentially what I want to say is that in some cases, there are case laws that will be applicable to your situations, and you will want to become aware of them in order to help guide the decisions that you make and the direction that you take on this. So you'll obviously be consulting with a lawyer. That is where you need to go. That's definitely what you need to do. If this is something and that's in a specific case. Now, when we talk more broadly, there are lots of opportunities in terms of seminars and webinars that are offered by employment legal firms. And if you do attend any of these, just for interest's sake or just to expand your knowledge and understanding, then what you'll find is that lawyers will do this. They will they'll accumulate the cases and they'll present the most significant cases on, in their regular seminars that they're offering. So nobody's suggesting that you need to go out there and find this information specifically. Although I will say that once you know that there's a case that's applicable that you want to look at, you can go to the Court of King's Bench. Sorry. It's stumbling a little too because I'm just not quite accustomed to the king yet. So yeah, so the Court of King's Bench can provide the transcripts and that kind of thing so that you can delve into that in great detail if that's what you choose to do. Okay, so then internally, so you wouldn't think of a regulatory environment as being internal, I don't imagine. Most people probably wouldn't. But I guess what I would say is that the strategy of the organization helps to guide what happens in the organization and how things are, how operations are conducted. And so strategy plays a role in that. Policy definitely will play a role as well, because your policies are your stated positions on certain areas. And so that becomes your rule, I guess, is what is one way of sort of looking at it. And then the procedure itself is just a very detailed set of instructions on how to get to that policy. So here's a good quote that we like a lot. Strategic human resources management is defined as the management of HR policies, philosophies, and practices to enable the achievement of organizational strategy. So there, those things keep coming up again, right? So philosophies, I would suggest to you, are part of the strategic piece of things. And achievement of the organizational strategy, as I've alluded to a couple of times in the past, is always at the back of your mind when you're dealing with these things. So from a strategic standpoint, we would do something called workforce planning, or we might do something called workforce planning. And I think that we do it even when we don't know that we're doing it. I think that the formal word for it is workforce planning, but you're always thinking about what is our need going to be next week, next year, 5 years down the road. Really what our goal is to determine what we need moving into the future. And again, it's a bit repetitive around aligning the HR plan with the strategic plan. And so that's what workforce planning does, is it seeks to collect the information that is needed to make sure that the right people are in the right place at the right time. And so how do you do that? Well, we could break it down into some steps. So linking to business goals, linking the workforce planning to business goals. Where do we want to be? So let's put a little bit of an example here and just sort of suggest that if your organization, let's say you've decided in your strategic plan, you've determined that you're going to stretch a little and you're going to introduce a new program, 3 years down the road, that's the goal. And so aligning that means that you have to look to your current workforce to say, okay, so we've got a couple of years, we're developing this program, we know we want to get into this area, what are we going to need? well, who do we have in our workforce now that might be suitable to guide us into that area, or do we have nobody? What are our gaps? And once you know what those gaps are in terms of workforce, you develop a plan. Well, we're using the term strategic action plan. I'm suggesting to you that you're just thinking about exactly what it is that you need. And so mapping out that new program that you want, it's going to require, maybe one manager, one supervisor, and 6 staff. So how are we going to achieve that? How are we going to get those folks in place? So we'll need to hire the manager first, and we're going to set out the timing, and we're going to determine what the resources that are required in order for us to be able to get that manager in place. And once that manager is in place, then we're going to acclimate them to the organization. And then at some point after that, they'll need to hire a supervisor. And so all the way along, as you're putting together this plan, you're actually mapping it out and saying, by this point in time, I'm going to need this, and I'm going to need this kind of money to support that effort. And you'll continue to do that until your gaps are closed. And then you're going to stop and look again. So ideally, once the 3 years has hit, the program is ready to go. You have all your staff in place. And then you're monitoring and you're looking again to say, okay, so we've gotten to this point in time. This program looks like it's going to be very successful. We're likely going to have to expand it next year. And so then the process starts again to deal with the expansion. So that's the idea of trying to align the workforce with the strategic planning piece, and just understanding that human resources, oftentimes it's the largest financial commitment of an organization. And so managing those resources becomes pretty important. And having it done at the strategic level takes it to the correct level of authority, so that it can be properly resourced. Okay, policy development being the next piece. So I won't spend a lot of time here at all, just to say that a policy is the position that the organization holds around management of functional areas. So policies, when they're being written, they have to be compliant with the law. Key point here is that if they're not, then the law supersedes, right? So that's important to understand. They should be clearly written. There shouldn't be vague. It should be vague, plain language, sorry. Should be written in plain language and should be accessible. This one I want to emphasize quite a lot as well, because what ends up happening oftentimes is that folks are, charged with reading the HR policy manual on day number 1, and then it disappears. And nobody ever sees it again or knows what it says or anything like that. So having it accessible to staff and managers is pretty important as well. I think that anytime we lean into it in conversations with employee, for whatever the reason is, we should be making reference to it so that they understand that this is where this is coming from. I know that people don't like to say we have a policy. People oftentimes don't like to hear we have a policy, but ultimately in human resources, this is the buck sort of stops there. We have to adhere to those. That's part of our own self-imposed regulations, right? We've said this is what we're going to do, therefore we need to be doing that. Procedures, of course, are the instructions, so how to apply a policy. So I've just thrown a basic little example in here. So the policy might say something like, we will ensure that staff salaries are in the top 10% for the position in the marketplace. And so what does that translate into for a procedure? Well, somebody has to do something. And so the HR coordinator then presumably is going to access some salary survey information. And that HR coordinator is then going to take that information and they're going to update whatever internal documents it is that guides the decisions. Maybe it's a salary grid, maybe it's not. But whatever it is that managers look to when they're planning to give increases to their employees, whatever that is, has to be updated. So somebody has to step in and actually do that work. And so that's what the procedure will guide. And again, that also forms part of the internal regulatory environment. Okay, practical applications and resources. So human HRIS is a human resource information system. It's an excellent piece of, or it can be. I shouldn't say that just broadly because I'm sure there are probably poor products out there. There's a lot of really great ones too. I have led the implementation of an HRIS and I could not recommend that particular one more. But even having browsed and gone through the process of having a number of different products demoed and just searching the net and understanding what's available out there really opened my eyes quite a lot. And so it's amazing what these systems can do. They obviously have a cost attached to them. And so they're not the be all and end all for everybody, but a piece of software that can hold all of your employee information, all of your policies and procedures is just fabulous to have one place where people can go to. So it can be super useful. You can also, consider outsourcing, and you could also consider developing talent internally. And for me, that's what ended up happening is that there was a need for human resources, and a couple of opportunities came up around some projects and participation in um, um, some externally provided projects that provided some additional learnings around human resources where I was able to take advantage of that, and that was great. Very helpful. So sometimes developing internally is useful as well. We are out of time. I can see that it's 1:55. I'm glad we're at the resources page. I know that this seems like a lot, and it is kind of a lot, but they're all really useful. There's depending on what kind of information it is that you're after, I would suggest to you that this is a really good jumping off point for all sorts of different things. One of the ones I didn't define it. CCOHS is the Canadian Occupational Health and Safety. That was a new resource for me. I want to say just very briefly, I want to comment on CPHR Alberta, which is the Chartered Professionals in Human Resources. That is the designation in Canada. All provinces participate except for Ontario. And so they're provincial. Each of the organizations are run provincially, but CPHR Alberta is looking for self-regulation. There's some big changes happening in the human resources profession currently. And the organization itself, as I've said, I'm a general member. They have different membership levels that allow access to things like HR toolkits, which can be super useful. The other one I'll highlight is Imagine Canada. Their site is HR Intervals. They have a ton of resources there, sample policies, templates, all of that kind of stuff. Definitely worth your time to go check that out. And lastly, SHRM, SHRM is the Society of Human Resources Managers in, I think I got that slightly wrong, forgive me. But they are the US designation. There is a mutual recognition between CPHR Canada and SHRM. So for anybody who's interested in going down that path. I just like this one. What do I actually do as an HR professional? I think that's wonderful because it's just so true. This picture with all of that paper tells you that that person really needs an HRIS, in my opinion. Yeah, and so last we'll end with a quote from Steve Jobs. And you have about 30 seconds for questions. Is that about right, Sandeep?
Yeah, I think we're okay. We have a couple of questions here in the chat for you, Tracy. Rachel's first question here is, what are the best strategies for aligning recruitment and performance management processes with business goals to reduce turnover and improve employee development?
Wow.
It's a pretty full one.
Yeah,
But if you have some comments about that,
I'm going to bring up the chat so I can actually see the
sure. Yeah,
question because that was a whole lot of words. Aligning recruitment and performance management with business goals.
business goals.
Yeah, yeah. So again, I guess you're forward looking. So you're always thinking about what are the business goals. And so reducing turnover, part of that has to do, oh, this is such a big question. It's such a big question. But I guess what I would say is just always having the business goals in mind and making sure that when you're recruiting, I wish I had a more specific example. to speak to. But when you're trying to recruit, you're going to recruit for the individuals that are just a second. I don't feel like I can answer this adequately without further information. So
That's totally fine. We can always connect Rachel with you after
let's
our
do that.
session today.
Yeah,
Um,
let's do that, please.
the next one, I'll relay to you here. How can HR ensure ongoing compliance with both internal and external regulations while adapting to changing business needs?
Well, I guess what I would say to that is that in terms of remaining in compliance with external regulations, you don't have a lot of choice on that. And so really being aware and understanding what those regulations are is the key point. So the internal regulatory environment is one where you have maybe a bit more flexibility. And so because your business needs, some of your business needs are coming directly out of your strategic planning, and that the strategic plan and the policy development and all of those pieces are your internal regulatory environment. So you have some control over that in terms of making sure that your policies and your strategic direction are like, if you want to sit with just the minimum, then you sit with just the minimum. Your policies don't have to offer anything over and above what the law requires you to do for employees. I guess what I'm suggesting is that the more that you offer, the more likely you are to retain good people and attract the right people. So it's part of the all of this discussion, which is certainly just an overview. We didn't get into some of the specific items around positioning. And so for because an organization has to decide, where do you want to be? Because, compensating your people in the top 10%, that was one of the examples that I used. Like, that's a really lofty goal and that's wonderful, but that might not be suitable for you. And that's totally fair if that's not. And so your policy that in that case might be something very different. I mean, maybe you're attracting people in a totally different way by providing the remote work. And so that's going to be what you sort of accentuate or emphasize as you're trying to recruit people, because that one is where your strength lies. Maybe you offer more vacation time. That seems to be a fairly
Mhm.
common one in the not-for-profit world. We can't do great on salaries necessarily, but maybe we can give you some extra time off. So when you position yourself in that way, and your HR plan and your policies are in alignment with that, there's no issue with the external regulatory environment, because you're just stating what you're stating. And so if that's where you want to be positioned, then you're still complying with your internal regulations because you've laid out your policies in that way. And as your business needs change, well, then maybe the policies evolve to bring you up to that level.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much, Tracy, for all of this amazing insight onto foundational pieces of HR management. And thank you, folks, for joining us today for this session. The largest part of our work is being responsive to your nonprofit needs and interests. And if you could let us know if this session did that by completing a brief survey, we would greatly appreciate that. I'll drop a link in the chat for you here now. And it should only take a couple of minutes to complete. So if you get a chance to do that, that would be wonderful. Sometimes the questions that you have need a more in-depth conversation. That came up in our Q&A period in this session as well. So if that's the case, we encourage you to reach out to us for more specific support and access one of our free problem-solving services. And so this could be a short phone call or video consultation, or a 1-hour problem-solving session that we call a clinic. These meetings happen between your team and one of our integral org experts. And so that's a way that you can get some of those more specific questions answered. Clinics and consultations are a part of our mission to educate and support Alberta nonprofits. So we are here to help. You can find out more about these services by visiting our website or by giving us a call. Integral.org is a capacity builder and nonprofit ourselves. Excuse me there. Our goal is to equip you with the knowledge and support to do your best work. And so we work in a number of core areas, including governance, strategic planning, risk management, legal compliance, financial management, leadership development, and more. And we work with nonprofits at any stage of their life cycle using a multidisciplinary approach to address your most pressing concerns. So our admin email here is on the screen as well as the number. You'll also receive my contact information with the slides, recording, and resources for today's session. And do not hesitate to reach out to us. We're here to support you in the best way that we can. Okay, well, that was it for today. Thank you all again for joining us. We appreciate your engagement and we hope to see you at a future session sometime soon.